Wavelength.
You know, Adelaide has worked really hard over the last few years to build a small bar reputation. When I was a kid, the big night in Adelaide was kind of, staying at home and watching the bill.
Sparking the combos about Adelaide.
As a female Sparky, I did get lots of comments on my gender.
You should be having...
Here to make a difference. Yeah, make the difference. Give the youth a voice.
On Fresh 92.7.
Yes, this is Wavelength on Fresh 92.7, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having with Zane and David.
It's been a hot one today, hasn't it, Zane? Nice to be in a nice air-conditioned room, though.
Yeah, that ties thematically into the general gist of tonight's show, actually.
It does, but more to that in a sec. But first today, everyone's talking about how the CFS has issued an emergency service bushfire warning just 10 kilometres from Port Lincoln at Duck Ponds. The CFS has warned that people in the area should take shelter in a solid building, as it is now unsafe to leave. SA Quality Home Improvements has fallen into administration and has been sold with $1 million in debt still owing. The business was sold 6 weeks ago, with the administrator saying the previous owner saw the writing on the wall. And plans to drill for oil off the Great Australian Bight have been delayed for the fourth time after the regulator has asked for the Norwegian operator to resubmit its environmental plan.
Tonight's all about the environment. Do you suffer from climate anxiety? We explore the psychological phenomenon that's led some young people to swear off of having kids in some extreme situations. Whoa. We hit the streets to ask, is Tinder dead? And next, a former White Ribbon Australia ambassador explains his harrowing story and where we need to direct our efforts in the wake of White Ribbon's closure.
Wavelength.
The closure of White Ribbon Australia drew a mixed response. Some domestic violence advocates believe the organisation drew attention and resources away from organisations at the front line directly helping victims of domestic violence. But one former White Ribbon ambassador believes we need to continue the work they were doing, and he explained to us his harrowing experience with domestic violence.
Now, please be warned that this story does have some content which may be distressing for some listeners.
Wavelength.
Arman Abrahimzadeh is leading a very important change from the ground up. 9 years ago, he and his family became the victims of a devastating tragedy. A tragedy that takes the life of one woman a week in Australia. Domestic violence. His mother was murdered in 2009 by Arman's father. And after seeing the devastating effects of family violence, Arman became an ambassador of White Ribbon Australia. I sat down with him to talk about his journey and the important work of anti-domestic violence prevention. What made you become a White Ribbon ambassador?
To tell you the short story, I grew up in a household where violence and abuse was quite normal and quite frequent. DV was something that we grew up with, so we never questioned it. But things got to a point where my own dad threatened to kill us. It was myself, both my sisters and my mum. And at that point, we decided to pack up our bags and flee the family home. Now, we fled the family home. We were lucky to get in touch with services who were able to help us, give us shelter, give us assistance, and pick us up and put us on a brand new path. But unfortunately, 12 months after we fled our family home, my dad managed to track my mum and murder her in front of hundreds of witnesses. And I guess it was from that point onwards where I saw the devastating outcomes that it can have on families in the community. So as I said, I grew up in a home where violence was normal. So I saw anything and everything from controlling behaviour, from manipulation, from financial control, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, right through to murder. So that is what got me involved in the White Ribbon campaign.
White Ribbon Foundation has received a bit of criticism over its time about the way it was run, such as allocating vital funds towards marketing and PR instead of frontline support services. How valid is that criticism?
So the one thing that people need to be aware of is that we fight domestic violence on two different fronts. The first place where we fight domestic violence is at the crisis end. That's where women and children and any other victims of domestic violence leave their abusive environment and go and get help. So that's your frontline services. That's places like here in South Australia, we've got places like Catherine House, Women's Safety Services. So these are the services that actually help those that have fled an abusive home. But we also find domestic violence at the primary prevention end, which means there are campaigns like White Ribbon Australia or even another national campaign called Our Watch that does a lot of primary prevention work, which means they're organised for ambassadors or other experts to go out to workplaces, to go out to schools, to go out to sporting clubs, to to talk about this issue. So even though those primary prevention campaigns don't necessarily help women there and then, they will help women in 5, 10, 20 years down the track. But seeing the work that White Ribbon and similar campaigns like Our Watch does is also important, because they'll work to reduce and hopefully later on down the track eliminate domestic violence.
Because it is such a prevalent problem, now that White Ribbon has gone into liquidation, other services in South Australia can domestic violence victims go to?
I guess whether if people believed in the White Ribbon campaign or not, that work at that primary prevention end is needed. So we need to try and I guess keep those conversations going and keep a similar sort of campaign. It might not be the White Ribbon campaign, but I think those conversations and those discussions, especially with our younger generation, are needed. But if people still want to, I guess keep that momentum going, if they still want to be a part of those conversations and part of a similar campaign, well, we've got a White Ribbon committee here in South Australia. That's I'm not sure what they'll do with the branding and what they'll do with the name, but the campaign is still strong. The momentum's still going. There's still a lot of work that's being done here at the grassroots level where it's needed.
Or do you think there's enough support services here in South Australia?
I think what we need to do now that White Ribbon Australia is no longer there is to keep that conversation going. I think one of the things that they did do successfully was to bring that discussion about healthy relationships, about family and domestic violence into homes, into workplaces, into sporting organisations, into schools, and that's where those conversations are needed. So I think as long as we keep those conversations going, I think White Ribbon Australia has done its job, and it's done a fantastic job.
Why do you think it is that the message still doesn't seem to be getting through, with statistics telling us 1 woman a week is being killed in Australia at the hands of her male partner?
I think family and domestic violence is a very complex issue. It's multifaceted, this issue. There are many things that turn a nice family home into an abusive environment. I think what we need to do is to keep that conversation going with our men, especially the young boys, because those conversations that we have now, today, we will see the results in 5 or 10 or 20 years' time in our future generation. I'm hopeful that in 10 years or 20 years' time, we can pick up the papers and we can read about the statistics coming down.
Wavelength.
Thank you, Kelly, having a chat to Arman Abrahimzadeh, who is also an Adelaide City Councillor, it should be noted, and is an ambassador for White Ribbon Australia, or at least was before it went into liquidation and closed its doors, with some very interesting opinions about the work that White Ribbon did, which was controversial for some who were involved in domestic violence campaigning.
Yeah.
So I saw some criticisms from people who... Basically, the argument was that White Ribbon Australia really dominates this conversation at a national level, but actual organisations who have people at the front line, they're directly helping women, because it is mostly women who are in these situations, they're directly helping women get out of bad situations. Right. And there was a perception from some that White Ribbon was taking some of the limelight and some of the money and donations from them.
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't really know the situation very well, but that's probably fair enough. But I know that they do a lot of amazing work. Or
they did
amazing work.
And it's that classic argument of, education and awareness versus tangible outcomes. And I think this is a situation, and this can be applied to many situations of social causes in society. You need both. You need both. You need to directly help people who are victims of these situations and people who are affected. Their lives are changed by, situations like this, in this case, awful domestic violence situations. But you need that national conversation as well to help nudge things along and, kind of like Arman said, to help the next generation grow up with a better idea of what is and isn't acceptable.
Absolutely, yeah.
What the hell is going on in politics at the moment? Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
It's been a big week for federal Labor, with an internal review into their unexpected election loss earlier in the year finally released. The review, helmed by our former Premier Jay Weatherill, cites a number of factors for the loss, including a weak strategy, policies that looked risky, and Bill Shorten's unpopularity. The former leader responded, saying he'd do things a little differently if the election were reheld today, while the current leader Anthony Albanese says he wants to work to unite Aussies. Meanwhile, Deputy PM Michael McCormack has slammed suggestions that climate change is contributing to bushfires, particularly those ongoing blazes in New South Wales and Queensland. Mr McCormack dismissed the concerns of, quote, raving inner-city lunatics and says those facing bushfires don't, quote, need the ravings of some pure, enlightened and woke capital city greenies. And finally, with the drought rolling on, the government's announced a relief package worth over $1 billion. The centrepiece of the plan is that farmers and small businesses will be able to take out 2-year interest-free loans. South Australia's also set to play a big part in relief efforts, with our desal plant set to finally be turned on. The plant will service Adelaide so upstream farmers can take more water from the River Murray. And that's what the hell's going on in politics this week.
Thank you, Andrew. Very interesting comments from Michael McCormack there.
Just call me a raving inner-city lunatic, why don't you?
He's not wrong. You live in the inner city and
True.
the rest speaks for itself.
I'm definitely a lunatic. Yeah, very bizarre comments, especially considering most of the science directly points to the increase of bushfires in Australia being like quite directly connected to climate change.
Well, that's it. And when people pipe up in a situation like this where there are bushfires in New South Wales, in the rural areas there, and now bushfires have just popped up near Port Lincoln as well.
Yeah,
in
just in
this
South
state,
Australia, yeah.
In this afternoon. When people pipe up and they start bringing up climate change and wanting action on climate change, all they want is to help those communities maybe prevent a situation like this from coming up again.
Exactly. And these situations are going to keep happening and they're going to get worse unless something changes.
And if we can, put plans into place, just like you'd put other kinds of bushfire plans into place, and if you're in a flood-prone town, you might put in infrastructure for dealing with floods. We just need to deal with climate change. And I don't understand why someone like, many, to be honest, who think like Michael McCormack on that side of politics, why do they turn this into a partisan issue? And why are they objecting to people who ultimately just want these things to not happen?
Exactly.
No one wants bushfires. Surely we can all work together on trying to prevent them wherever possible and nip them in the bud.
It's absolutely bizarre.
We are talking a little bit more about some of the issues that this brings up in just a second. We're talking about climate anxiety, David, a massive investigation that you did such a good job on. I will tease that.
Wavelength.
It's sort of uncanny, this lead story today, because I've been working on it, for over a month now. We've been planning to run it. Yeah, we've been planning to run it for a while. It's been something we've been wanting to do for a long time. And these fires this weekend are just strangely, extremely connected.
Let's get into it. Concerns about climate change are growing seemingly with each passing week to the point where it's starting to affect some people's lives in tangible ways. It's gotten to the point where some experts have given it a specific name of climate anxiety. David has investigated this phenomenon, which has led some young people to even swear off of having children because of their environmental concerns.
Wavelength.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is calling for immediate climate action, warning that the world is facing a grave climate emergency.
This House must declare an environment and climate emergency. We have no time to waste.
More than 11,000 scientists from around the world have declared a climate emergency. A scientific paper signed by the group declares a climate crisis is underway and accelerating.
Then the problems in another 20, 30 years are really major problems that are going to cause great social unrest.
Government blocked an attempt to do so last month.
Spiraled dangerously out of control unless we take rapid and dramatic action now.
Over the next decade.
This is no longer about a distant future.
Anxious yet? I don't know about you, but turning on the TV, jumping onto Twitter and Facebook and stepping outside in the middle of an Adelaide summer is starting to freak me out. Every few weeks, the world's top scientists remind us of the enormity of the problem in front of us. We have about 10 years to make sure the human race isn't wiped off the face of the planet as a result of man-made climate change. As a 25-year-old, that is quite terrifying. Just the other week, 11,000 of the world's top scientists slammed Australia for not doing enough in the face of what they have described as a climate emergency. In a situation like this, it makes sense that our fight or flight senses are triggered. You can either face up to the problem and try and do something about it, or you can drown yourself in the internet, lapping up as much brain-dead content as possible and attempt to ignore the global problem. Personally, I'm wired to fight. But when faced with such an existential crisis like climate change, it's hard not to succumb to intense feelings of anxiety. Psychologists have named this recent phenomena climate anxiety, and it's a growing problem in Australia. According to survey data from youth mental health organisation Reach Out, 4 out of 5 Australian students report being somewhat anxious or very anxious about climate change. But succumbing to anxiety certainly isn't the way forward. I spoke with David Carlin, author of a new book called The After Normal, who is posing an alternative way to deal with the reality we're living in.
So we came up with the idea of a kind of survival guide for what it's like to live in this time, which we're calling the after normal. And the after normal kind of means accepting that, you know, we're no longer in a time that you could have thought of being sort of normal as we thought the present and the future was going to be. And so it could be anything, you know, small or big, but just something that we thought we wanted to think about and spend some time thinking about that's somehow related to these questions around how do we respond, how do we think, and how do we feel, and how do we act in response to climate change.
I think a lot of young people especially have a lot of anxiety, and I think there's been reports of an influx of people worried and seeking professional help because of anxiety directly stemming from this fear of the unknown. What's happening with the planet? Are we going to survive? Etc., etc. Is that sort of addressed in your book, or?
Yes, very much so. Like we I think, you know, I'm in my 50s now, and Nicole's a little bit younger, but I think a lot of people in our generation also feel this sense of climate anxiety. A lot of people, you know, some people are in complete denial, but people who are more open to listening to what the scientists say, you know, it sounds so freaky as to be kind of unbelievable, and so big as to, you know, how do we just go on with our daily life, you know, if this is kind of what's confronting us.
Are you optimistic about the future? Do you see us overcoming this as a global population?
You know, I think another of the things that I read about Extinction Rebellion is they say, you know, we don't offer hope, we offer courage. And I think in the end, it's kind of like not a matter of being optimistic or pessimistic in the sense of kind of crossing your fingers. You know, it's about what's the world we want to make, and in little ways and big ways. And we can all start doing that. You know, we all have different capacities, and we can all, you know, from voting down to things we can do in our neighbourhoods and stuff. So, you know, I vacillate. You know, obviously, when you read what the scientists are saying, they're saying that we have to act 5 times faster than what the Paris Agreement says, and our government isn't even living up to the Paris Agreement, and so it's just a long way away. But on the other hand, you know, humans got such sort of innovative and creative potential, and all the technologies are already there to make all these changes, you know, to renewable energy and all these sorts of things. But there's nothing really to stop us.
Wavelength.
David's investigation there into the phenomenon of climate anxiety, which is influencing the decisions of some young people and and, you know, actually affecting the lives of a lot of young people who are really worried about the state of the world.
Yeah, and it's not just young people. I mean, David Carlin, he's a bit older, and he's the one who wrote that book, The After Normal, but he was telling me that he also, just even writing the book, which is sort of like an A to Z of how to deal with this new era we're going into, he experienced it himself. So it's definitely a strange phenomenon. Very 21st century, very modern.
Exactly. Tonight we're asking, do you feel anxious about climate change? Do you suffer from climate anxiety? We would love to hear from you. Have you made any decisions in your life or decisions about your future influenced by the state of the environment right now? I do want to quickly address some interesting text messages that we got while that story was airing. The first one saying, stop being alarmists. People are alarmed.
I think that's the point. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think that we're being particularly alarmist. I think I'm trying to address the feelings of alarm that people are quite validly feeling in the face of 11,000 scientists saying that the world needs to address this problem. It's scary. And yeah, I'm alarmed. I think though that we need to sort of take a step back and work out how, as a community, a global community, we can address this and use our anxious energy, which is, like someone has said in the Facebook comments, that it's a useless waste of energy. We can use that energy and harness it to make change and actually do something about this problem, because we are totally capable of doing that.
Exactly. 11,000 scientists the Bureau of Meteorology as well confirmed a link between climate change and the increasing severity of bushfires we've experienced over the last decade or so.
Yes.
And even in the last couple of days, a whole slew of mayors of regional towns in New South Wales have come out and called on the government to actually recognise the link between climate change and bushfires. So that's for the person who texted asking us to explain how climate change causes bushfires. Obviously, it's not a direct link, but it makes the situation a lot more worse and makes things a lot more sensitive.
Wavelength.
I'd like to shout out the two people who just walked past on their way to the cinema and stared at us dancing to that song.
They don't know what song was playing, they don't know how good it was, and they don't know how much fun we're having, Zane. I will dance in this window forever.
Tonight's topic, not so fun. We're talking about climate anxiety, which more and more people of all ages, but young people in particular, are experiencing to the point where this literal label has been given to it. This phenomenon where people are so worried about climate change that they're actually, it's affecting their lives, and they're actually making life decisions such as considering whether or not to have kids based on climate change and based on environmental issues.
Yeah, which is quite a hectic thing to happen to somebody. It's definitely a psychological problem now.
Exactly. Melissa texted in and said, my partner and I have had this discussion about bringing children into a world where climate change could drastically affect their future.
Yeah, I think that, I understand that perspective. I think it's kind of sad, though, because at the same time as being worried about the future and being worried about the future for your children, I think that we do need to remain positive and remain optimistic in the face of it.
I do agree with this.
And I think that by, bringing children into the world, you're in a way, giving the finger to climate change. You're saying, no, these kids will make a difference and we can fight this. It's not going to be hell, and I'm optimistic, which I think is the energy that we should be having rather than crumbling up and turning into a fetal position in your bedroom until the world explodes or whatever,
Yeah, I think in a very inarticulate way, Steve, who commented on Facebook, touched on that. He said, feeling anxious about it is a useless waste of energy, but we do need to start using cleaner energy. You were talking before off mic, though, about how actually this anxious energy that we're kind of starting to have as a generation and as a society should be used and harnessed to bring about different outcomes.
Yeah, I think instead of... And I think that in part 2, I do sort of explore this with my interview there. But we need to, turn those feelings of being scared into something more positive, and like what we're doing now, which is talking about the problem and maybe coming up with some solutions, or at least making it more awareness of the problem.
Exactly. We got a text from 4AA saying it's not climate anxiety, it's environment anxiety. Same thing. We as humans have abused, is the word I'll replace instead of their much more violent verb. We have abused our environment of resources and not cared for too long. If you don't worry about how we treat our environment, the future doesn't look good.
That's absolutely right. I mean, if you look around what's happening in New South Wales, it's terrifying. What's happening in the Great Barrier Reef, coral bleaching there, it's terrifying. And it's going to, we had a 50-degree day last summer in Adelaide. I don't think I've ever experienced that before.
And when so many weather records are being broken in an unprecedented way, when, things like bushfires are occurring with much more severity and intensity than they have before. And I don't think it's politicizing any issues to say that. We're literally going off of what the Bureau of Meteorology has said in the case of that bushfire statistic. We're going off of what so many scientists around the world have said. And so to the fun people texting in, as you can imagine, about how we're apparently raging leftists, this is just science, and I'm just relying on scientists.
I do find it odd that that climate change has been characterised as a political issue. I do understand it, though, for one reason is obviously it is our governments that we elect, and we need them to take action on behalf of us because as individuals we aren't that powerful. But two, this isn't political to me. This is just the reality of the world we're living in. When you have 11,000 scientists telling you that this is going to happen, it's something that we should all take notice of. regardless of politics, it doesn't matter how much money you have, where you live, the colour of your skin. It literally does not matter. We are all going to be directly affected in the same way.
Wavelength.
The text line tonight is very fun, as I'm sure you can imagine.
It's going off.
0428 97 97 if you want to get involved in the convo. But right now, let's get into part 2 of your investigation into this, David. We're investigating climate anxiety. And in this next part of the story, you've spoken to one of the most polarising activism groups for climate change, which is the Extinction Rebellion. Talking about why young people are getting so worked up about this issue.
Wavelength.
Whether you've been stopped in the middle of the road by one of their protests, seen them on TV, or watched some of the controversy surrounding the group in Victoria, it's pretty hard to ignore Extinction Rebellion. The protest group, calling for action from the federal government, are synonymous with the push to try and reverse some of the effects of climate change. I spoke with Jamie Dunn about why so many young people feel anxious about climate change and how they're using that anxious energy to try and make a difference.
There are many people in Australia, we're quite connected to the outback and connected to natural spaces. People love to go camping, they love to go diving. And on a personal level, I've seen the places that I used to love just dry up and shrivel up and disappear. So there's this real sense of loss that these natural spaces that used to be so grounding and so wonderful to just be in are disappearing. When you look at the climate science and you really look at the projections, you realise it's terrifying. To even comprehend it is hard. And to look at that, especially as a young person who knows that that is their future, it can be very emotional. There can be a lot of grief, a lot of anxiety. It can be paralysing for people because fear is a great motivator, but only if you know the way forward, right? Fear's great on the savannas of Africa because if you fear the lion, you either don't go where the lion is or you go and you fight the lion, Yeah. There is this we can deal with that threat. I feel like the anxiety and the real fear around climate change is based a lot on not feeling like there's a way forward. And I guess part of the reason why I'm here is to say there is a way forward. Yeah. We have 10 years. If we can mobilise in an effective way, like we have in World War II or at other times in our history when there's been a real threat that we've decided to reorient our society towards to fight, we can do this.
Do you find that being an active participant in the anti-climate change movement helps alleviate that, or does the constant exposure make it worse?
I feel like there is a bit of a cycle when it comes to that. There's a sense of you look at the problem, you feel the fear, the deep fear, you take action to fight that fear. There's a sense of togetherness and powerful, power when you take action, especially with other people, because when you're taking individual action, it can feel a little bit isolating. But especially when with other people, there's a sense of hopefulness that comes out of that. It's about a sense of we are doing the best we can. We are doing all that we can. And it feels like there is a possibility that this will have the outcome that we want. Although it might seem like our governments have been doing their bit, they really actually haven't been doing very much. So as a society, we haven't seen, big renewable energy targets. We haven't seen really strong policy come out. We haven't really seen a market response to this issue either. Or even a whole-scale media deep dive on climate science and what we can do about it. So those people who say that they feel upset and they feel scared and they feel like there's no way forward, on one level, we haven't even really tried, And that's something that you can hold on to. You're if we actually tried, then maybe we could do this, but we need to get off our butts,
Wavelength.
Part 2 of David's story about climate anxiety, speaking to a very polarising group, actually.
Extremely polarising.
Extinction Rebellion, who are kind of responsible for all the protests that we've seen over the last couple of months. They might have stopped you in traffic while you're trying to get through town.
Yep.
But with some good points, I think, about why a lot of young people are getting so angry about all this.
Yeah. I mean, they're sort of on the front lines, and I think not telling anyone to... I don't want to tell anyone to go join them or anything, but they are, I guess, sort of the ones that are putting that anxiety into some sort of action that they think is going to help bring some change about. But we did get some other great tips in, though, on the text line.
Yeah, we did. 294 in particular I loved. This person said, use your fear and anxiety to bring about change in your life and in your community. Change your diet to be more plant-based, clean up a dirty spot, etc. Your actions inspire thousands.
Absolutely. I think one of the really good points I took away from that interview with Extinction Rebellion was about how, as Australians, we're so connected to nature. Like, we grew up in such a really beautiful country with tons of natural reserves and beautiful things to look at and just amazing wildlife. And for a lot of people who grew up going camping, going hiking, it is the loss of that is heartbreaking. It's terrible to lose those things that we've been so lucky to grow up with that our children might not be able to.
Exactly. And you might not agree with their methods of going about it. I've probably grown a little bit more skeptical than when I first started hearing about them. But that's a separate tangent that I think would derail the entire show if we dug too far into it. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Wavelength.
So this next one is about a little thing called Tinder. You may have heard of it, Zane.
I've spent time on Tinder.
It's like a prison sentence.
They were bleak days. They were necessary days, but they were bleak.
We've all been there.
We have. However, since Tinder started a few years ago, how long has it been now, actually?
Christ, probably about 5 years.
Probably should have researched this before we decided to bring it up on air. We're so good at what we do. Since Tinder has popped up, a new wave of apps have really popped up in its wake, and some of them have really stolen Tinder's thunder. I'm thinking of things like Bumble, where the woman gets to decide whether she responds first, so it kind of puts a bit more power back into her hands.
Power to her.
So Adrian hit the streets to ask, in no uncertain terms, is Tinder dead?
Wavelength.
In many ways, Tinder was a pioneer in the dating app world, introducing many features that would later be used by its competitors. But with such a huge variety of dating apps nowadays, has Tinder become obsolete? Adelaide youth told us if they have ever used any of these online dating platforms.
Yes, I have. Tinder.
Yeah, I've used Tinder for about a month.
No, haven't needed to.
Yeah, several years ago. Yep.
How many dating apps do you know of?
Or maybe like 4. Not many.
Not very many, I wouldn't say. Probably Tinder mainly. But there's Tinder, Bumble, there's a queer one called Her. I know that there's a lot. There's one for like professionals with LinkedIn. I know that there's a lot.
People are saying nowadays that Tinder is dead. Would you agree with that?
I'm not sure. I guess that I know lots of people still on it, so I feel like it's still alive.
I don't use it anymore, but I certainly know a lot of people who do still use it, especially for like a hookup culture.
I think it's on the purpose of the person on the dating app. Like if it was just for a hookup, then I don't think it's dead. But if it was for like to meet people for like long term, then yeah, I'd say it's dead.
Do you think that Tinder has lost the spark that it once had?
Yeah, I think so. I think because now you got to pay for stuff, don't you? If you want like the exclusive stuff, then yeah, I think it's lost its spark a bit. I feel like lots of people don't really talk about it as much as they used to.
Do you think there's room for Tinder in the current dating app scene with all these other apps that are more focused on certain groups of people and demographic?
I mean, people still go on there to try and find relationships, so I mean, like, good luck to them and everything, but I would say, if it's still got like a reputation. Myself, I probably wouldn't be going on there to find a relationship.
If you could only choose one dating app to use for the rest of your life, would it be Tinder?
Again, I don't know. I sort of like the idea of Bumble, because obviously they talk to you.
For the rest of your life, Tinder? I don't know if you'd find sustainable relationships over Tinder compared to others.
I mean, I'm not very familiar with many others, so I would say yeah, probably. Yeah.
No. I probably wouldn't use one. Yeah. I wouldn't use one.
Wavelength.
Adrian hitting the streets to ask, is Tinder dead?
A life sentence on Tinder sounds like the worst thing in the world.
Oh my God.
Though, I did find my partner of, how many years? 3 so far on that exact app. So it is
3 entire weeks.
Weeks?
No,
3 hours.
You've been together for a long time. I know this.
3 days. 3
yeah,
hours.
I mean, I met a number of people through those apps who I actually had decent things with, and then happened to meet my current partner in a very strange series of events that I can't... essentially through real life, through this radio station in a roundabout way.
Wow.
It's a long story. I'm not going to unpack it.
Wavelength.